Uh, Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this World Human Sciences and Management Conference 2021. This is Rudra Narayan Das, Executive Director, Center for Adivasi Research and Development, Odisha. We are proud to announce that this conference is conducted along with Indian Institute of Sambalpur, Central University of Odisha, and Rebenshaw University, Cuttack. I welcome our speaker for today, eminent economist, one of the finest brain of this 21st century, uh, Professor Ugo Pagano, and participants uh, across the globe through Facebook and YouTube Live to listen Professor Ugo Pagano. The broader theme of this conference is agnotological context, disciplinary practices of social sciences, and policy frames. On behalf of CARD, I extend my profound gratitude to Professor Mahadev Jaiswal, Director, Indian Institute of Management, Professor Sarath Kumar Pallita, Vice Chancellor, Central University of Odisha, and Professor Sanjay Kumar Nayak, Vice Chancellor, Rebenshaw University, Cuttack. The convener of this largest virtual conference, eminent Indian historian, Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda, and eminent policy activist, writer, and philanthropist, Mr. Charudat Panigrahi. The main outcome of this conference is to come up with the national and international framework for the education system in future. The crux of this conference will be the use of digital technologies such as artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and virtual reality that is being increasingly adopted after the outbreak of COVID pandemic. We hope this conference would help students, faculties, researchers, and all to expand their mental horizon and help the education system to adopt the best. Friends, Center for Adivasi Research and Development is a leading research-oriented institution promoting ethnographic, empirical, and evidence-based research for engaging and addressing the challenges that 21st century globe face today. Prime agenda of this institution is to come up with the potential policy solutions for social change while believing the idea of 3D and E3. 3D stands for debate, discussion, and dialogue, and E3 stands for expertise, experiencing, and education. The institution focuses on marginalized communities and works for their livelihood to protect the nature, culture, language, and identity in particular. The age of modernity has witnessed that change is the only constant phenomenon for societal purpose to enhance knowledge. Our information work for them is methodological and avoids paradoxically frameworks which neglected so many centuries from theory to become practice. The card sincerely believes in the concept of social marketing, which is seriously looking for non-profit marketing and builds new social entrepreneurship for check and balance mechanism to glorify generations to come. A Center for Adivasi Research and Development come to serve with the holistic approach of critical thinking in education to fill the gaps, to plan accordingly for the voiceless communities. For, for beneficiaries, direct it in reflecting global South societies. Friends, in today's evening, we have with us eminent economist, one of the very important uh, speaker of our conference, and also he's a Nobel nominated man, and his contribution to the economic world is very uh, uh, proudful to be have in our conference, Professor Ugo Pagano. Now, I would like to invite Professor Saban Bag to introduce Professor Ugo Pagano to our audiences. Over to you, Professor Saban Bag.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rudra Narayan. So, good evening to one and all. Hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Okay, great. So, yet another day for all of us in this journey of World Human Sciences and Management Conference. And as rightly mentioned, it is truly a great privilege for all of us to have such a dignified and fertile brain with us who has given his consent to be the speaker of the evening. To begin with, a small introduction. As I said, this introduction is very small, very brief, because the length and breadth across which Professor Hugo has worked would be really short to limit within few words. But anyway, uh, Professor Ugo Pagano graduated with a MA from the University of Siena in 1973. Subsequently, he received his PhD in economics from Cambridge University, where he was later to become university lecturer and fellow of Pembroke College. Professor Ugo was the president of the Italian Association for the Study of Cooperative Economic Systems and member of the Council of the European Association for Evolutionary Political Economy. He is former founding editor of the Journal of Institutional Economics. Currently, Professor Pagano is a professor of economic policy and director of the PhD program in economics at the University of Siena, where he teaches courses on theory of the firm, law and economics, and political economy. He also teaches at Central University, Budapest. In 1997, he was awarded the CAP Prize for the essay Translation and the Speciation of the Japanese Model by the European Association for Evolutionary Political Economy. As I said, the uh, introduction would be very short, although the work and the depth of work is very vast. So without wasting any more time, I will take this opportunity to invite Professor Pagano, and I earnestly request all the participants to be actively participate in this discourse and take the leverage of the uh, lecture that is going to be delivered by Professor Pagano. Now the floor is yours, Professor.
Okay, thank you very much for this very nice introduction. I am saying, I should say that in basically a few days, I'm going to retire. So all these things, I mean, that you mentioned, so, you know, I will have time to dedicate to my work and possibly to write a book and so on. I start with this short introduction to this paper that I have also sent to you. Somehow this paper is related to the book that I wrote many years ago. In the meantime, I've been really interested in very different topics. So it's really going back to something that I did in the past, but somehow connected with certain things that are somehow, I think, new. And I did not understand at that time. Now the argument is: can you see my screen? I am sharing my screen. You can see it. Yes, you can see my slides.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Now let's start with one important prediction that was made by Keynes. And Keynes was saying that we would, in a very short time, have the problem of finding some other activity to fill our days, because we did not need to work so much. And so he really thought that we would have basically a society of leisure, and this society of leisure will be a very good thing, not for the money makers, but it will be a good thing for the people who cultivate themselves into fuller perfection of the art of life. So this was Keynes' prediction. William Morris, clarifying that when we consider work, there are really two types of work, one good, the other bad, one not far from removed from a blessing, a lightening of life, the other a mere curse, a burden of life. Now, on the same topic, Karl Marx diverged from Keynes in two respects. The first idea of Marx was that all this could be achieved only under socialism in the future, not under capitalism. And the second point made by Marx was that really in the future, we will not have a society of leisure, but a society where work had become life's first want, life's prime want. So I must say that if we consider the first point, clearly Marx's prediction was not really correct, because socialism has not made us closer to this type of ideal. But somehow the fact that we don't see this drastic reduction in working time makes Marx's prediction maybe less unrealistic than Keynes' prediction. And the other point that has been considered by many women and by the feminist movement is that work is not, of course, paid work. There is a lot of work that is done in the house, and this gendered opposition between breadwinning and caregiving and is something that is part of an ideology that gives to genders very particular roles. And if we could really split our work between care and other activities, independently of our gender, this will make everyone better off. Now, the question that then we should face is really one that is a fundamental one from a theoretical point of view. What is leisure and what is work? Now, this may seem to be a trivial question because we are used to have some intuition in what is leisure and what is work. But basically, the divide is based on some institutions and is really typical of capitalist societies. There are some institutions where they are geared to produce useful things, profitable things, and others that, like the family, like clubs or other sporting activities, that are considered the typical institutions of our leisure time. But then this is not giving us some clear definition of what is work and what is leisure, and what is going to be leisure and what is going to be work in different societies. And from this point of view, the standard theory that we have is particularly confusing. It is in a way an ideology of this divide. Why? Because we really consider two types of activities, leisure and work. The first one, leisure, is not really an activity, it's a form of inactivity and influence the utility function, but has no consequence in terms of production. And work is considered to influence the production function, but is not having any consequence, any direct consequence. We will see it better in a second on our welfare. So if we want to have a simple scheme of how this is working, we can think of an individual as having a total amount of 24 hours. And these 24 hours have to be divided in two different productive tasks, X1 and X2. And these two tasks are, say, performed for 4 hours. Then you get some consumption goods through some F that are this production function. And because of this consumption goods, you get some utility. And utility is also influenced by the leisure that you have. And because you are working for 4 plus 4 hours, so 8 hours, your leisure is 16, so that your final utility will be determined by Y and Y not, by the consumption goods that you have and the leisure that you have. Now, you can immediately see from this scheme that, of course, the amount of work that you do is influencing your welfare, because more work means less leisure, but is only doing it indirectly and not directly. So, for instance, suppose that you are doing 4 hours of one task and 5 hours of another task. Then the total will be 9 hours. And the total of 9 hours will imply that you will produce some consumption goods, presumably more consumption goods. But now your leisure will be only 15 hours. And in this way, the fact that you work more and you have less leisure is having some effect, some negative effect on utility. However, suppose now that you have this other situation in which, instead of doing 4 hours of one task of X1 and 4 hours of X2, you do 2 and 6. The total amount of work is still 8. The amount of leisure is going to be still 16. So from this point of view, this rearrangement of tasks is not really affecting directly utility. So from this point of view, by saying that leisure, the part of our time for which we are inactive, and not directly the activities themselves are influencing our welfare, we are supposing that we are somehow indifferent among different types of activities, as long as the total amount is not increasing. And of course, we can have different types of inactivities. If you take the Harrow-Debré model, you will have a leisure associated to each skill, to each type of the activities that the skill can do. But still, we get the utility from the inactivity and not directly from the type of activities that we do. So we basically have to consider 2 issues. The first issue is how the disutility of different tasks, this is this first yellow line, is influencing utility. But we have also to consider a more fundamental issue. What is leisure? This that until we are alive in a certain way, we are always active. Even when we sleep, we are active. We are reproducing our body. And when we eat, we are active. So inactivity really coincides with utility from inactivity, and leisure is not a good idea. I mean, our life is divided in several activities. Some are more pleasurable, some less pleasurable, some more productive, some less productive. And the issue is to understand which one are the activities for which, if you like, in society there is a deficit. Few people want to do it, and the others for which there is a surplus. Many people want to do it, but there are not enough resources and not enough other activities that we can do it. So, summing up, the neoclassical model can be schematized in this way. We have got the total time, and we have got 2 activities, activity X1 and activity X2. In this way, you have some consumption goods, and you get some utility. And then from non-being active, X0, you get, from this inactivity, you get leisure and positive utility. This is a basic scheme. And the basic scheme that you get I mean, I'm not going through all the maths. It's just, I think that you are familiar with this. But the basic idea of a very schematized neoclassical model is that you are maximizing welfare. And this is, if in a very simplified way, this is due to leisure Y naught and consumption good Y. And leisure comes from this inactivity X naught. And you can have two productive tasks through which you produce the output. And then the total time must be equal to the time for which you are inactive, X naught plus X1 plus X2. You maximize and you get what? You get the standard condition that the marginal productivity of your time, of your labor, must be the same in each task. So that the marginal productivity of X1 has to be equal to the marginal productivity of X2. Otherwise, you will be better off by moving your time from one activity to the another. Now, the other things that we know is that once we have got this scheme, we can decentralize through shadow prices to a consumer and to a producer. The consumer that is maximizing here simply the difference between utility and cost, and to a firm that is maximizing profits. Now, as I have anticipated, the first thing that we should do is to introduce directly X1 and X2 in our utility function. And if we do that, of course, we start getting a scheme where we have got something that, if you like, is more complex, because now we have that there is some total time, and given this total time, we can divide it in to activity X1, activity X2. Through these activities, we produce the consumption goods Y. But these two activities, observe, now are directly influencing utility. You are sensitive to doing more or less of a certain activity. And the inactivity, of course, is also influencing indirect utility through the fact that each unit of inactivity is leisure that is giving you positive utility. So if we have this scheme, then the formal model becomes this one, in which, if you like, the only difference with the scheme that we had before is that now X1 and X2 are argument of the utility function. Now, when we do that, we get different conditions. And the condition is what? That the marginal direct utility, if you like, the utility that you get directly because you are doing X1, plus the utility that you get indirectly because X1 is producing some useful output, Y, must be equal to the sum, again, of the direct utility that you get from X2 and the indirect utility that you get from X2. So from two different tasks, now we should equalize these two things. Of course, if we are indifferent between these two activities, then this collapses in the conditions that we have seen before, that the marginal productivity should be the same for each task. But we can be indifferent for the allocation of a machine, the allocation of a building. So we may rent out the building and somebody uses it. And as long as this person does not ruin the building, we are not really interested whether he's using it as a dentist, as a surgeon, or just, you know, to have a family. The important thing is that in the end, after the rental period, the value of the house is the same. But unfortunately, we cannot rent to somebody ourselves and walk away. So we are always sensitive to the uses of ourselves in production. And this is a big difference, if you like, between our time, ourselves, and other things. Now, what happens then? Can we still decentralize? Yes, we can decentralize, but to more complicated institutions. And intuition is that, in fact, we should have a different price, W1 and W2, for each particular use of ourselves, for each particular task. So we should have different prices. Now, of course, this is a possible solution, but it also implies that whenever we change tasks in production, we should be continuously renegotiate our wage. So that a simple way that you have in management is that you try to maximize directly something that somehow takes also into account the utility function of the workers. So by internalizing to a certain degree this utility function, then you can do better. And we can say that we have got a more inclusive type of organization where more stakeholders have got a say when we understand that following a cause, the firm is a suspension of markets, but if it is a suspension of markets, and if we are not indifferent among different tasks, then we should have, as employees, a say in the organization of the firm. So this is the first outcome that you get, that this idea that you can decentralize between profit makers and utility makers really works well if we were like machines, but we are not. And some form of participation, democracy, involvement in production of the producers is always important. So this is what we may consider to be inclusive organization. But as I have observed, the problem is even more complex than that. Because up to now, we have simply said that we should consider this preference for tasks. But we have still accepted this idea that there is activity for which we are getting some utility, and then inactivity for, or better, we are getting some disutility, and different degrees of this utility if we consider these preferences, and then inactivity from which we are gaining utility and welfare. So somehow we have got an exogenous distinction of work and leisure, where leisure is somehow identified with inactivity. Now, this is really counterintuitive, because we have got leisure activities. There are activities that we enjoy. Some are very active, not inactive. And also what is leisure in one moment of history may become worker later on. And from this point of view, what was the founding father of our field, Adam Smith, had a very clear insight. He said in the 10th chapter of the Wealth of Nations that hunting and fishing, the most important employments of mankind in the rude state of society, become in the advanced state the most agreeable amusement. And the pursuit for pleasure, what they once followed from necessity. So now you may go hunting for pleasure, pay for it, whereas that was work and hard work in the early rude state. What does it mean? Well, it really means that only if you know the state of the technology and the preferences, then you can decide which particular activity can be considered to be leisure in a certain society or be considered to be work. And so there is no way of splitting time of an individual in leisure identified as in an activity and work as activity. We are always in activity when we are alive. Some activities are things that we like to do, and we are ready to pay, if you like, for them, and others we do, because we need to have often an income to live. So this is the difference. So we should overcome this leisure work divide. And so in economics, leisure has been treated as an empty space that is not filled with any activity. And work is an activity that is only done with the purpose of allowing us to obtain useful things. In real life, leisure is a set of enjoyable activity which we carry out for their own sake, and work is an activity which is partially done not as an end in itself, but as a way to be able to carry out other activities. So let's imagine now the usual Robinson on his island. Now, we may start with a simple consideration that maybe he does two things. He goes hunting and eats the venison. Now, you would immediately say, well, clearly, when he's eating the venison, that is the leisure activity. And when he's going hunting, that is work. Yes, this is very likely, but it's not necessarily true. Maybe that the birds are the only birds on the island. They have a terrible taste, and really, the Bull Robinson has terrible digestion problems. He does not like to eat at all. By contrast, he loves to go hunting. So somehow, eating is then a necessary activity to go hunting. Hunting in that case is the leisure activity. So that is a first point that we can consider. The other point that we can consider that usually in this society that you had hunting and gathering. And it's very interesting that for this hunting and gathering communities, there's been a debate. I refer to the debate in a footnote of the paper that I've given to you. And some anthropologists have maintained that, in fact, gathering was a much more productive activity because it was giving you food every day, and hunting big prey was much more of a sport to show off. And so hunting was only possible because it was heavily subsidized by gathering. So this is another possibility that you have got two different activities, and somehow one activity is done in excess of what is his productivity, and the other one is really done in the other conditions. So we can see here that we can imagine now a more complicated scheme. We have got total time, and given total time, we can simply divide it in activities. So there is not something that a moment where we are inactive until we are alive. And there is some net output that we produce from this activity. And the problem is that for each activity, we produce some net output, but we need the net output from some other activity. So when you go hunting, activity X1, you get a net output Why there is a net output? Because part of it are calories that you need, to go hunting. But you need also some net output, in this case from gathering, that is subsidizing the activity of hunting. And for gathering, there is a net output, and maybe that it does not need any net output in excess from the gathering activity. So you would survive only by gathering, but of course then you get a mix of the two food, but one is subsidizing the other in terms of calories. One will not be enough to survive, the other it is. And then the utility is depends on the fruits that you may gather, the things that you may hunt, and the two activities that you have. Now, here we can start getting an endogenous definition of what is work and leisure. In this example, and I don't know whether the example is true, maybe that is very far from reality, but suppose for a second that it's true. Yeah. I'm hearing some voices. Yeah, what is happening? Can I go on?
Please continue, sir. Please continue.
Okay. Okay, here we can get an endogenous definition. And then we complicate, if you like, our model. And we get that utility depends on all the activities. You find all the mathematical passages in the paper that I've given to you. But we also say that each output depends on its own activity, and it also takes from the other activity X2. So hunting produces some net output that can be negative, not enough in terms of calories to survive, and it takes something from the other activity. Whereas in the case of gathering, the net output may be positive, and it also takes some proteins from the hunting activity from the venison. So here, then you get what? You get that again, the condition is that now what we should equalize is what? The direct utility that you get from each activity, its marginal productivity, and how much minus you need from the other activity. These are the conditions that you need from optimality. So in the end, these are the same, I'm not repeating them, but basically the same condition that we got before for tax 1 and tax 2. The only difference now is that we have to add this Z that express the interdependence between these two activities, that the people who go hunting consume the fruits, the people who are gathering, and the people who are gathering consume some of the venison. And this is what makes us adding these last terms. Now, which type of inclusive organization should we have? How can we change the view? Well, the thing is that when you think now of the wages that we consider for the different uses, now in this situation, some wage may become negative, because in fact, you may do it for pleasure, and somehow this activity or part of it is done at a loss. And indeed, you would decentralize to prizes to some hunting club and to some gathering firm, but you can also have a firm that is bundling, an inclusive organization that is bundling both activities, and will consider also the pleasure of the people performing these activities, so that it will not simply equalize the marginal productivity of the two activities. It will choose to do more hunting activities just because for some people this activity is enjoyable, and in a market they will be ready to pay for that. So that is how the situation changes. So observe that the view that we get of the economy in this way is a bit different from the standard one. We get pleasure and welfare from all the activities that we perform. There is not a world where our only aim is passive consumption and inactivity. And this could be a much more balanced world. It will be more environmentally friendly. And somehow this world will bring us closer to the type of world that was desired by Marx and Keynes. In fact, let's go back now to Marx and Keynes. Marx and Keynes believed that due to technological progress, the future will make more pleasant and satisfactory work and more leisure available to all. And one was stressing one thing, one the other, but they had this very nice prediction about our future. The knowledge society seemed to make this future possible. In creative and caring activities, machines could not replace humans, of course, but they could alleviate the toilsomeness of all sorts of repetitive work. Now, because of the access to this form of capital, then we would have, because this capital could be somehow cheap, because knowledge was becoming an input and knowledge is a non-rival good, then somehow a lot of people in this more productive society would enjoy the intrinsic pleasure of knowledge and innovative work, and this will be consistent with some features of the future society that was considered in different ways by Marx and Keynes. And in these terms, maybe the distinction between work and leisure will be somehow blurred, because we will try to shape these activities in such a way that we somehow either we find them less painful or even challenging and interesting, so that passive consumers and satisfied workers then will belong to the past. Now, this view does not seem to have become much closer in the society in which we live. And of course, there are big differences between Italy, India, America, but in all these cases, for one reason or the other, we are really very far from this ideal. What do we have instead? Well, what we have had instead, and is something that I have considered in other papers, mainly one that I've written in 2014 and is published in the Cambridge Journal, it is The Crisis of Intellectual Monopoly Capitalism. What has happened is that this knowledge society has turned out to be very different from what it was predicted. We have got huge intellectual monopolies And knowledge has transformed capitalism less than capitalism has transformed knowledge into capital, that somehow knowledge itself has become commodified. And the fact that it's become commodified is something that really both Keynes and Marx had not predicted. Even Marx, with this idea that science was embodied in machine and could be an enemy for the worker, he was still thinking that knowledge itself was not capital and not a commodity. So he would have not predicted that when you take the top 500 firms nowadays, the 80% of their assets are intangibles, and knowledge is a big chunk of that. And making knowledge capital, of course, has created even a society that is even more unequal for several reasons. Owning a machine does not imply that somebody else cannot own a similar machine. The ownership of knowledge is somehow a monopoly, and it implies that others cannot use it. And also the same thing has allowed to decentralize production and other phases of also of the services that are needed for production to other firms. So this has created a lot of inequality. Even if you take the US, a lot of the inequality is now mainly inequality among firms. Why? Because the core firms, keep very few people employed, and they decentralize production in the US or outside US. They decentralize to other countries, but this creates a lot of inequality, even within the US. And also, we have that because of this type of monopolies, we have created a society that seemed to boom at the beginning. So when the Knowledge Society came about, and when the TRIPS agreement came about, there was a boom. There were the roaring 90s. But in a way, if you think about it, it is natural that when you reinforce intellectual property rights and you privatize knowledge, you first create a boom because people invest a lot to get these rents. But then the more the knowledge gets colonized, the more the blocking power of this monopoly works. And for people, it becomes difficult to invest because you find that there is always somebody that has got some right to produce the good that you do not have, and you need sometimes many licenses, and sometimes your own innovation can only work if you get these licenses. So you have basically to bargain with these big firms. They've got a big bargaining power, and usually the small innovative firms are then bought at convenient prices by the big ones. So what we have had is a completely different type of capitalism. And so somehow this idea that we could have a future society where because of increased productivity, we would either have nicer work a la Marx or more leisure a la Keynes has not really materialized. Now, if we want to be optimistic and we want to use the Marxian terminology, we may say that this is a clash between relations of production and productive forces. The knowledge society, with its potential productivity, the fact that knowledge has become an intensive input And knowledge can be used by many, many people without being destroyed. Is a non-rival good. Implies that some aspect of the Marxian utopia or the Keynesian utopia or the Morris utopia may be reachable, but because the relations of production have extended the standard capitalist relations also to knowledge and to the new productive forces, even if they are not particularly good to manage them, well, this implies that we live in this situation, but it's a clash, it's a contradiction, and sooner or later things may change. So maybe that intellectual monopolies in the future may be replaced by public goods. And I find extremely strange that the public knowledge about vaccines is not treated, COVID vaccines, I mean, it's not treated as a public good. I mean, from this point of view, you can see really the change from the time of the polio vaccine, where Sabin and Salk thought that people who thought that you could patent it were crazy, you know, and they were made available to everybody. Or just if you think of more recent experiences, think of the flu vaccine that you get every year for the seasonal flu. That is also not patented. But, you know, even these pandemics has been a good chance for the intellectual monopolies to enlarge the sphere of their activities. But maybe that the situation may change, and then can be a potential of alternative models of economic organization. And we can understand and believe this potential if we have a framework where we move beyond the leisure work divide. And this is true for several reasons. The first is that when we leave the leisure work divine, then we can reframe the nature of an employment relationship. It's not that we are renting our time in the same way in which we are renting machines. It's a very complex things. The organization that we should have are organization where all people should have a say, and they should be thought of also as organization where everyone has got a say, even when there is a core firm and a lot of peripheral firms. We should have the peripheries, if you like, and the places where the processes are decentralized to have a say and be able to rearrange things in such a way that the experience of working life is more satisfactory. We can look in a different way to the division of labor within the family. And there it's very important to know that, of course, leisure time is not the absence of activities. And it includes activities that people cannot afford to buy sometimes, and they are tough work, you know, like babysitting or things like this. Or they can be bought, but people want to perform themselves. Why? Because we cannot buy care for our relatives without altering its nature and its meaning. So we do their activities, there are productive activities, there should be a fair distribution of these things. And the aim, again, is to do these activities well and in a way that is fulfilling and is not to look for more products consumption and more inactivity, defined as leisure. And also, if we eliminate the logical identity between inactivity and utility enhancing leisure, it becomes clear that people do not seek voluntary unemployment of their capabilities. You know, this idea that in utility function you get inactivity, it makes many economists believe that people are always trying to look for inactivity. Well, it's not really so. People are trying to look for nice activities, okay? And some of them may be even productive. And so the purpose should be to employ them in a way that, you know, they get more pleasure from this type of activities. So, to conclude, this has been a typical divide of economics, is also what we may define a divide between ends and means. And there was this very famous essay by Lionel Robbins, where he claimed that the nature and the significance of economic science consisted in the relation between ends and means that had alternative views. This is still the most popular definition of our field. While human activity transformed into leisure has been taken as an end, production activities have been treated only as means, forgetting what Kant's imperative was, that you should act so to treat men and women in your own person, as well as in that of anyone else, always as an end, never merely as means. So we should replace this linear view of the economy, going from resources to consumption and to leisure and inactivity, with circular models where means can also be ends, especially when the means are ourselves engaged in certain activities. And this is not only necessary to understand the real economy, it is also required by well-known moral principle. Okay, I think that I've taken enough time and I stop here. And I think I've done in 1 hour. I hope that I have not taken too much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your wonderful deliberation. Now I would like to request Professor B.C. Das to go for a quick comment, please, sir.
Yeah. Namaskar, sir. First of all, I appreciate your enlightened talk on this topic, a very relevant topic related to economic activities by human being, and for the purpose of utility, peace, and development. I have 2-3 reflections. First of all, I can say, am I audible, sir? Am I audible? Am I audible, Dr. Vikram? Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I can say that we are debating upon many ideological issues. We are debating on neoliberalism and neo-capitalism. We are also talking work and leisure divide. And we are also debating on individual aim of utility and social aim of utility. Number 2, now whatever we do less for social utility and more at the detriment of social order and peace. In the name of economic development, we are approaching to mass destruction. When we look at climate emergency and or the fear of third world war possibilities in the age of Anthropocene. Then what is your idea about what you are discussing regarding the activity or utility, work divide, or you may say leisure time? That is, we can say, overall work culture of human being in our day-to-day life. Even there are also issues of gender equity and other issues, related issues. This is a peace-loving, happy society. So, what is your idea?
Oh,
I
I
mean,
think, yeah, I
about
think
work culture, development, this is a peace-loving, happy society.
well, I think that the development interpreted as development of our, if you like, our own humanity and our own happiness defined in some way has to be identified with a peaceful society. And also, I take your point that the fact that we have this ideology that the end of production process is inactivity and production goods is not something that is helping the environment. I mean, we could have if you think of Keynes' utopia and the Marxian utopia, we could have just nicer activity and nicer time and a bit less consumption goods. That is the basic idea. Now, this, of course, there are some countries that exaggerate in this direction more than others. And from this point of view, countries are not all the same, and social classes are all not the same. But certainly the fact that we have got this theoretical framework does not help us to achieve this end.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Sir, a little bit surprised when you talked about all these things related to Robbins and this nature significance of economic science. I would love to know something from you. What Charles Dickens and particular um, Smith is concerned, related to public goods is concerned. When we are talking about this paradigm shifting of development, this boys poverty is very holistic approach related to this public space and public philosophy is concerned. What is your idea, particular, when you are going to do a development in terms of boys poverty or even community linkage programs? What kind of development model should be adopted for this community as concerned? What is your ideas on it, sir?
Well, let's put it in this way. I mean, it's we should have a framework in which, instead of looking so much at the goods for people, we should think that their welfare depends on actually what they're able to do. Okay, if you like, something also related to the capability approach by Sen, by your famous compatriot. And if these activities are so important, we may think that there are some activities that people like doing. Some may be productive, more productive, some less productive. And to do these activities, you need some other activities. So there can be a deficit of activities for some activities. And perhaps development should be seen as trying to get rid of this deficit, so that in the long run, we do more and more activities that we do not consider to be a terrible pain to do them. And in this way, we feel better, the idea that we work like crazy and then for 5 minutes we consume a lot of stuff. I mean, it's not really a good model of development. So look at the activities that people want to do, look at what is necessary for that, see that there is a gap, and try to close the gap.
Oh, sir, then in particular, post-truth narration is concerned, when this post-truth word introduced in the Oxford Dictionary, in particular 2014 onwards, There is 5 societies as concerned. There is moral society, there is cultural society, there is society called political society, and there is a society called village society, and there is society called the environmental society. Then if always in terms of talking related to societies as concerned, what the public goods is concerned, and what kind of public economy we have related to these sectors like public sector, or what you call it, this mining agenda of this capitalistic approach, or even the multinational agencies work related to transnational agencies. They try to impose their ideas in terms of this binary of WHO, WTO, and IMF. What about your concerns relative as a fine mind of economic as concern? The discipline as should be very narration related to the new normal as concern and the new narratives for the people's perception. What is your idea on restrict on this particular phenomenon of the global order?
Yes, thank you for this question. Now, I think that the global order is really in a mess. And the reason why it's in a mess is that we have created very strong rights for private knowledge in terms of intellectual property rights that are defended by the WTO and by the TRIPS agreement. And we do not have any sort of global entity that is engaged in investing in knowledge conceived as a global common. And this is strange because, of course, much knowledge is a global common. The same chemical formula that I use, you can use. Many scientific discoveries can be used by everyone. And the fact that I use a piece of knowledge does not mean that anybody else cannot use the same piece of knowledge. So we have got this situation that is very asymmetric, for which each country tries to free ride on the other countries and has some unfair competition, because for each country it's better to produce privatized knowledge, each state together with its firms, privatizing knowledge, even for the COVID vaccine. But when everyone does that, then we have that everyone is worse off. So what we should do? Well, we should say that participating into international trade implies that each country invests a certain proportion of this GNP in open science, available to everyone. And this is a very important route, to achieve development. And this should be enforced by the WTO itself, because the fact that you only invest in private knowledge is a form of unfair competition and is a form of free riding. So if there is no floor to that, that is very bad. So from this point of view, I do not see the waiver that has been proposed by South Africa and India for the COVID vaccine simply as a remedy to an emergency situation. It should be something more, each time that there is a public purpose to be achieved through knowledge, there should be this wave, and it should not be so complicated. It should be, there should be directly some investment in this respect. So I think that the institutions should be completely changed, and should be reformed. I hope they will be. Of course, the waiver will be the first step, But we certainly need much more than that. We need to invest much more. Let's put it in this way. We can have the type of capitalism that Marx and Keynes were thinking of, and within, and there were a lot of inequalities, but within which their utopias were thought of, was a capitalism of open markets and open sides. And the two things, in a way, come together. Now we are going to a world of closed market and closed sides, which is completely different, and is also bad, of course, for the development of people who do not have monopoly access to knowledge. But in the end, bad for everybody, because it's people say that tariffs are bad, but what are intellectual property rights? In a way, they are like global tariffs. They are worse than tariffs, because somehow when I have a tariff, I can simply prevent a country from importing the goods in my country. With intellectual property rights, I can make this country not producing the good at all. So we have got a world that is very monopolized, somehow blocked, and in this situation, we are very likely to have, I believe, a secular stagnation. I think that this monopolization of the economy that is leading to secular stagnation, not any intrinsic reason that technology is bad.
Thank you so much, sir, for your wonderful answers. Now, I wish to invite Dr. Shobhan Kumar Bag to interact with sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bikram. Well, thank you, Professor Ugo, for making economy easy, at least for some time. So, given the talk that you have delivered, I have two propositions. The first one is, more like a sort of clarification and, in fact, understanding for me as well, and for the larger interest of the participants. And the second one would be a sort of reflection that I would like to, have from you, sir. As I understand from your talk, given the definition of leisure and work, so can we say, like, when priority changes, the very notion of leisure and work changes, and of course it is context that plays to this entire notion of leisure and work. So am I correct or wrong? I mean,
no, you are absolutely correct. That's what I was trying to say. Thank you.
Yeah. And the second one would be, sir, now, I mean, how do you see this entire global economic affairs? Although you have responded to Dr. Bikram's, question, but taking the same discourse to a different extent, how do you see this entire, global economic affairs, given the fact that there are countries whom we call as underdeveloped and developing countries who are more engaged in utilizing their time in the name of leisure, which eventually makes the developed countries economically more strengthened, and they also economically become more power. So don't we see, or can't we say that this is how contributing to a global economic imbalance situation? How do you reflect on that, sir? And if yes, how can we put this entire workforce in an order that will also boost the economy of those countries? So your response, sir.
Well, I think by making what are now intellectual monopolies global commons. And whenever you make an intellectual monopoly a global common, you certainly decrease inequality. And you favor development, and you favor development, especially in those countries that, if they've got no barriers to have access to knowledge, and to use it, they can do very well. So I think that potentially each time that there is an intellectual monopoly, we should think that there could be a global common. That's how we could change the situation.
If anyone, any question, you can direct ask to Professor Pagano.
Thank you, Professor.
Okay.
May I request Dr. Amulya Acharya to have a quick comment? Dr. Amulya Acharya.
Yes, sir. Good evening,
Yeah.
sir. Professor Pagano. I would like to ask one question. So how we can assemble and organize the leisure time with the livelihood of minorities and the livelihood of tribals, and that you can say linguistic minority or any ethnicity group, how we can assemble that for increasing their livelihood, how we can use their leisure time properly, and in what way and extent we can help them out to utilize their leisure time for their livelihood development.
Well, of course, there is a specificity for each group on how you want to spend your time. That is not something that can be centrally decided. But the important thing is that whenever you take tribes, sometimes even if they are pure poor tribes, or if they are peasants and so on, there has been often an element of creativity in their work, and that has been taken into account. People have struggled to have it, so it's very difficult, to answer for all the cases. We should listen to the needs, I think, of different people to find an answer to your question, I believe.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much, sir, for your enlightening session. Now I'd like to invite Dr. Meena Das to go for a formal vote of thanks.
Namaste, sir. Namaste from India. Myself, Dr. Inadas from Gangadhar Mary University. Esteemed dignitaries present on the virtual dais, and most esteemed honorable our today's resource person, Professor Ugo Pagano, sir, Professor of Economics, University of Siena, Italy, and also sir, as an alma mater of Cambridge University. And really, we are. I'm very fortunate. I feel very obliged to propose a vote of thanks to our esteemed speaker, today's speaker, and also all the professors present here, research scholars all over India and also beyond India. I'm going to present my vote of thanks. Sir, really, your deliberation on Beyond the Work Leisure Divide, a possible future for human activities. It was in fact, it is an eye opener for all of us. Whoever is fortunate to hear today's deliberation, because you have presented that when inactivity gives positive utility, it becomes strength. We need more inclusive type of organization. We can make balance. Inclusive organization between work and pleasure is required. And as you have highlighted the quote of Adam Smith, founding father, Adam Smith, has pointed that hunting and fishing, the most important employments of mankind in the rude state of society, and become in its advanced state their most agreeable amusements, and they pursue for pleasure what they once followed from necessity. So leisure is an empty space that is not filled with any activity, and work is an activity that is only done with the purpose of allowing us to obtain useful things. Sir, you have given endogenous definition of work and leisure, and the inclusive organization may now be at the same time a hunting club and a gathering farm. So there is evidence, sir, that physical health affects participation in leisure activities, and that both physical health and activities affect well-being. So we get pleasure and welfare in all activities that we are doing, and due to technological progress, the future would make more pleasant and satisfactory work and more leisure available to all. But unfortunately, sir, as you have highlighted, that things have not gone in this direction. Knowledge has transformed capitalism less than capitalism has transformed knowledge into capital. So very interesting fact, sir, we got to know that the ownership of a machine does not entail that non-owners cannot use identical machines. By contrast, the intellectual ownership of knowledge entails that others cannot use identical or even similar knowledge. So most important indicator of well-being and leisure activities, if we have a framework for division. You, sir, your thoughts have energized our minds. Even it has shown us a new way of looking at leisure and looking at inactivity and productive activity. So leisure activities positively in fact affect well-being, even inactivity and production of goods. Sir, as you have said, nice time activity is very important in our life. So I need to mention my deepest sense of gratitude, appreciation on the behalf of Center for Adivasi Research and Development CARD, Odisha. I would also like to highlight here, sir, that when I went through Google, I got to know so much about you, but I never thought that you appear so young, so energetic, and your presentation will energize us in this way that will also productively use our leisure activities. Now, with this, I present my deep sense of gratitude to you, sir. On the behalf of CARD, I would also like to present vote of thanks to our esteemed director, sir, Dr. Bikram Keswari Jaina, who has planned this event. It is really very difficult to plan such a big event. Thank you, director, sir, and thank you, executive director Rudra Narayan Das, sir. I'd also like to thank the dignitaries of the program, Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda sir, Charudatta Panigrahi sir for conceptualization, Professor Srinivasul sir, Dr. Visidas sir, and our team for coordination. Thanks to Shravan Bag sir and everybody who has been there in our team. Our sincere gratitude to patrons of the program, Honorable Professor Mahadev Jaiswal, Director IIM Sambalpur, Honorable Professor Sanjay Kumar Naik Sir, Vice Chancellor Ravenshaw University, Honorable Professor Sarath Kumar Palita Sir, Vice Chancellor Central University of Orissa, and Dr. Amulya Sir, and everybody who has participated in this global event. And last but not the least, a big thank you to each participant who became part of this teaching, part of this learning process. Thank you all. Thank you so much for attending this event. Namaste, sir. Namaste again from India.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ninadas, and thank you so much, Professor Ugo Pagano, and looking forward for future engagement also, sir. And this is a formal good night from India, and namaste.
Okay, good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye-bye,
very
sir.
much for organizing
Thank you,
that.
thank
I
you.
enjoy giving it. Okay,
you, sir.
bye-bye. Okay, bye. Thanks.